The attack begins. Inevitable.
Part 1. The silence before fire. The Caribbean slept under a sky of iron. Beneath that vast horizon, the USS Knights, a $2.5 billion Arleigh Burke-class destroyer carrying 1,000 sailors, drifted through black water like a blade cutting through velvet. The mission was routine, a humanitarian call to assist two stranded civilian oil tankers with failed engines. 34 nautical miles off Venezuela's coast, it was the kind of quiet duty that rarely made the news. But silence at sea is fragile. In Caracas, the radar rooms of Venezuela's coastal defense network pulsed with dim red light. Operators stared at screens, and a single blip, small, steady, approaching, set off alarms that would soon awaken the hemisphere. Within 90 seconds, senior officers labeled it an intrusion. Reports flew upward through the chain of command. A U.S. warship near our waters. Admiral Rafael Morales, the hard-faced guardian of the Venezuelan Navy, made his decision without hesitation. To him, proximity was provocation. He issued one sentence that would change the course of history. Engage immediately. The order reached the Bolivar 213, a $750 million Venezuelan frigate armed with 20 Chinese-made C-802A anti-ship missiles, each capable of splitting a destroyer in half. Its engines roared alive, slicing through the dark surf toward the American vessel. Aboard the USS Knights, radar specialists picked up the heat signature of an incoming contact. The pattern was deliberate, the acceleration abnormal. 12 nautical miles, 22, 26. In less than 4 minutes, the Bolivar closed in, fast, aggressive, and silent. Standard naval protocol dictated calm communication. Clear transmissions in English and Spanish were broadcast into the void. Venezuelan Navy vessel, this is USS Knights, operating in international waters. There was no reply, only the faint electronic hum of radar echoes growing stronger. Then came the moment no one could take back. Without warning or words, 12 missiles launched from the Venezuelan ship in a synchronized burst of flame. 12 steel predators tore across the sea surface at nearly Mach 2, each skimming just 5 meters above the waterline, low enough to stay hidden from radar, fast enough to erase a destroyer before its crew could prey. The attack turned the calm Caribbean into a crucible. What had begun as routine duty had just become the opening strike of an undeclared war. Part 2. When Steel Meets Lightning. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Knights, the world erupted in red. Sirens screamed, panels flashed. In seconds, the destroyer's 1,000 sailors moved with rehearsed precision. Commander Ethan Cole, battle-hardened by thousands of hours in combat simulations, did not hesitate. His voice cut through the chaos, calm and absolute. The Aegis combat system came alive. Fire control units spun into readiness. From 41 vertical launch cells, 20 SM-6 interceptor missiles burst upward, trailing fire. Each was a $4 million dart of artificial intelligence and precision, rising to meet the death that raced toward them. At Mach 3.5, the interceptors streaked across the night. The first hit came 12 nautical miles from the ship, a flash of orange and thunder that cracked the horizon. The next two followed instantly, turning the sky into a grid of explosions. 11 out of 12 Venezuelan missiles were erased in midair, each dissolving into rainfire, each intercepted with machine perfection. But fate spared one. The 12th missile, skimming lower than the rest, broke through the defensive screen and slammed into the Knight's aft repair deck. The explosion tore open steel plating, ripping through the maintenance bay and setting off a chain of ruptures in fuel pods. Flames burst upward, painting the deck in light and fury. 2 sailors were caught inside the blast radius, suffering third-degree burns. 10 others were injured by flying debris. The air turned to smoke and screams. But within 40 seconds, damage control teams Bravo and Delta sealed the inferno, flooding the deck with CO2 foam. The destroyer survived, scarred, scorched, but operational. Its armor held, its engines still turned, its flag still flew. From orbit, satellite relays transmitted real-time footage to Washington. By 5:00 a.m., the Situation Room at the White House was lit by the glow of fire streaming live from the Caribbean. President Donald Trump watched in silence as the screens showed the burning deck of the Knights, a U.S. warship attacked without warning. Around him, the nation's military chiefs stood motionless. Admiral Robert Hastings, Chief of Naval Operations, broke the silence. His words were a verdict. They fired on our ship without cause. This is not a mistake. This is a declaration. That single line marked the shift. Patience was gone. The United States would answer, not with restraint, but with Operation Steel Response. Part 3, The Hammer Awakens. By dawn, the USS Mason, another Arleigh Burke-class destroyer stationed 170 nautical miles east of Barbados, received encrypted orders. Its mission? Steam west at flank speed and prepare to engage. Simultaneously, two F-35C Lightning II jets launched from Naval Air Station Cecil Field, Florida. Each carried 6 AGM-158C long-range anti-ship missiles. Stealth weapons worth $3.8 million apiece, capable of hitting a target nearly 300 miles away. Their destination? The Venezuelan coastline. Their purpose? Restoration of deterrence. Over the Caribbean, the sky glowed red as the first rays of sunlight touched the sea. But this dawn was not peaceful. Satellite feeds showed the Bolivar 213 retreating toward La Guaira naval port, leaking smoke, its radar spinning madly. To Caracas, it looked like survival. To Washington, it looked like an open target. Inside the Mason's command deck, Captain Trent Mallister watched live drone footage. The Venezuelan ship, limping but still armed. He gave the quiet order. We will intercept before they rearm. At 6:27 a.m., the Mason reached engagement range, 38 nautical miles from Venezuela's maritime line. Every communication was recorded, every maneuver tracked, evidence that restraint had been exercised. But war is a language of inevitability. At 6:31, the line between defense and retribution dissolved. The Mason locked coordinates. The F-35Cs vanished into stealth mode. The operation entered its second phase. The United States Navy, silent and surgical, prepared to deliver the kind of precision strike that defined a superpower. Part 4. Ghosts in the Sky. At 7:10 a.m., the Caribbean horizon burned orange, not with sunrise, but with anticipation. The Mason fired first, unleashing 7 Tomahawk Block 5 cruise missiles. They weren't meant to destroy. They were bait, decoys designed to light up Venezuelan radar screens. The Tomahawks were roared across the sky at 550 miles an hour, bright and obvious. The Venezuelan crew took the bait. Panic filled the comms room aboard Bolivar 213. Believing they faced the full U.S. retaliation, they launched 14 surface-to-air missiles in 85 seconds, almost 70% of their remaining defenses. On the Mason's radar, the Venezuelan sky turned into fireworks, a storm of misguided interceptors blowing up phantom targets. The sailors on Bolivar cheered, convinced they had won. They never saw the real threat. 45,000 feet above, invisible to radar. The F-35C Lightnings were already in position, 2 silent ghosts cutting through the stratosphere. Each jet released 6 LRASM missiles, their radar profiles masked, their guidance locked on the heat of the Venezuelan ship. 12 missiles, 12 shadows, Mach 2.5. Less than 2 minutes to impact. At 7:23 a.m., the Caribbean Sea lit up with vengeance. The first missile vaporized the Bolivar's bow, tearing open the hull like paper. The second and third collapsed the flight deck. A fourth detonated beneath the radar dome, blinding the ship entirely. 2 more plunged into the bridge, killing 14 command officers instantly. The final warhead struck below the waterline, a double detonation equivalent to 2.5 tons of TNT. The Bolivar 213, pride of the Venezuelan Navy, broke apart in 2 fireballs. Steel twisted. Flames climbed hundreds of feet, and within minutes, the ship that had started the conflict was gone, swallowed by the same sea it once claimed to defend. Over 120 sailors were thrown into the water. 60 vanished beneath the waves. By 7:30 a.m., the radio crackled with a final transmission from the Mason. Engagement concluded. No further hostile intent. And then, silence. The sea returned to stillness, but it was a silence heavy with warning. Part 5, The Ashes of Deterrence. By midday, the fire had vanished, But the Caribbean still glowed with the memory of war. Satellite images from U.S. Space Command revealed the truth from orbit, a plume of black smoke rising from the sea, and beneath it, the skeletal remains of Bolivar 213, resting 240 feet below the surface. The once proud frigate was now a rusting monument to miscalculation. Its wreckage split clean through, leaking oil and silence. Within an hour, the images flooded global networks. 200 news outlets broadcast the footage: the scarred ocean, the oil-slicked waves, the remnants of steel. Anchors spoke in urgent tones. Analysts tried to define what had just happened, but no one needed subtitles. The truth was visible in every frame. The United States had answered, decisively and without hesitation. In Caracas, the government went dark. For 36 hours, no statement, no briefing, no explanation. State television filled its schedule with patriotic music and shots of calm seas. But the calm looked artificial, the eyes of a nation that knew what had been lost. In Washington, the mood was iron and discipline. Inside the Pentagon, naval analysts reviewed every second of footage. Frame by frame, radar by radar, they reconstructed the sequence of death. 12 Venezuelan missiles launched, 20 U.S. interceptors fired, 1 impact sustained, 1 frigate destroyed, 0 American casualties. The numbers told their own story, a 15-minute engagement that rewrote modern naval doctrine. The USS Knights, though wounded, stood as proof of technological supremacy. Damage reports calculated $28 million in repairs, ruptured fuel pods, charred steel, melted wiring. Yet despite the devastation, propulsion and power systems remained intact. The destroyer would live to sail again. By mid-afternoon, President Donald Trump addressed the nation from the Roosevelt Room. His tone was measured, not triumphant. America, he said, did not seek war, but it would never apologize for defending its people. His words rippled across the globe, the kind of statement that markets could measure. Within minutes, oil futures surged $14 a barrel, currencies dipped, global exchanges went red. For the first time in years, the Caribbean, long a highway of trade and tourism, had become the most monitored body of water on Earth. In Caracas, whispers filled the naval academies. Young cadets watched old propaganda films that spoke of defiance and sovereignty. But they knew what the truth was now. A navy had been erased in 12 minutes. A generation of sailors was gone, and with them, the illusion that power could be borrowed from foreign arsenals or old alliances. The Bolivar 213 had represented pride, a flagship built to show independence, to prove that Venezuela could project power beyond its shores. But pride, unguarded by reason, had dragged the nation into annihilation. The cost of pride: at sunset, the Caribbean returned to silence. The sea lay still, shimmering like molten glass, reflecting nothing but the sky. Beneath that surface, the wreck of the Bolivar 213 still bled oil, painting the water in thin black ribbons. The United States Navy maintained search operations through the night, recovering survivors where possible. 17 Venezuelan sailors were pulled from the water, shivering and covered in soot. They were treated aboard U.S. vessels and later released under humanitarian protocols. But more than 100 remained unaccounted for, lost to the depths, unrecorded except by the sea. At Naval Station Norfolk, footage of the entire engagement was archived in encrypted vaults, 9 terabytes of classified data. Every missile trajectory, every radar ping, every explosion was stored and time-stamped. Evidence of precision, restraint, and discipline. The Pentagon labeled it the shortest naval war in modern history. From first launch to last impact, 12 minutes and 26 seconds. It was not war as the world once knew it. No armies, no drawn-out campaigns, no declarations. It was the new language of power, instant, invisible, and absolute. In boardrooms and intelligence offices across Europe and Asia, strategists studied the engagement like a blueprint. Every intercept, every algorithm of the Aegis system, every data burst from U.S. Space Command was dissected. The message was unmistakable. In the 21st century, speed and precision outweighed numbers and noise. The world reacts. By nightfall, world capitals buzzed with cautious rhetoric. The United Nations called for restraint, while private diplomats whispered of deterrence restored. In Beijing, officials issued a muted statement about regional misunderstanding. In Moscow, silence, a silence that spoke volumes. Only Washington moved with purpose. Across the Atlantic, NATO forces conducted joint readiness drills, a not-so-subtle reminder that one act of aggression in the Western Hemisphere would not go unanswered. The USS Knights, its hull scarred but spirit intact, began its slow journey north toward the U.S. base in Mayport, Florida. As it moved, U.S. reconnaissance drones shadowed the Venezuelan coastline, scanning for any sign of renewed hostility. There was none. Caracas had gone quiet. The silence was not peace, it was paralysis. In living rooms across Venezuela, families watched censored news broadcasts showing calm seas and patriotic songs. But the sailors' families knew better. They gathered near the docks of La Guaira, waiting for sons and fathers who would never return. The wind carried the smell of fuel and grief. No words came from Admiral Morales. His office remained dark, guarded, isolated. Reports suggested he had resigned. Others said he had fled. None could confirm which version was true. Only that the man who ordered "engage immediately" had vanished into the silence he created. The edge of power. In Washington's Situation Room, the footage of the engagement looped in silence. Each replay was a study in precision. The moment the Venezuelan missiles left their tubes, the instant the Aegis system lit up, the split-second intercepts measured in milliseconds, where machine logic triumphed over human rage. What the world saw as dominance, the Pentagon saw as a lesson in restraint, because beneath every successful interception lay a truth. One miscalculation could have triggered global war. The line between deterrence and destruction was thinner than ever, a digital thread separating order from oblivion. Inside the U.S. Navy's Pacific Command, a new doctrine began circulating. The Knights Protocol, outlining step-by-step response measures for any future engagement involving hostile radar locks within 35 nautical miles. It became mandatory reading for every destroyer captain in the fleet. Meanwhile, intelligence analysts traced the origin of Venezuela's attack. Satellite intercepts revealed encrypted communications from Chinese defense advisors stationed at La Guaira. Though never officially confirmed, the evidence suggested tactical support, a data relay that enhanced the frigate's targeting systems. The discovery reframed the battle entirely. What the world had witnessed was not just a Venezuelan miscalculation. It was a proxy test, a probing of American response time and electronic warfare systems. And America had passed that test with surgical perfection. The sea remembers. By November 3rd, the Caribbean was calm again. The morning sun touched the water where the Bolivar 213 had vanished, turning the oil sheen into a mirror that reflected the price of pride. Insurance companies froze maritime coverage for the entire region. Oil tankers rerouted hundreds of miles east to avoid contested waters. Satellite networks tripled their surveillance of the Caribbean corridor. For the first time in decades, global shipping maps drew a new red zone, a digital scar stretching 34 nautical miles off the Venezuelan coast. The U.S. Navy called it Sector Echo 13. The locals called it the graveyard. Beneath those coordinates lay 137 sailors, a broken ship, and a memory that neither current nor tide could wash away. As dusk fell, the USS Knights sailed past the coordinates of the battle. The crew stood on deck, watching the horizon glow faintly red, not from war, but from the last light of the sun sinking behind the sea. The American flag fluttered above the scorched deck, edges torn but still alive. Far below, the ocean shifted inside, carrying whispers of metal and ghosts. History would record November 2nd, 2020, not as a triumph or defeat, but as a lesson in conflict. That restraint, not rage, is what separates civilization from chaos. The engagement had lasted 15 minutes. The consequences would last generations. Epilogue: Fire and Discipline. In the days that followed, think tanks and military scholars coined a term, the doctrine of controlled fury. It described what the world had just witnessed, a nation capable of unleashing overwhelming power, yet precise enough to stop it the instant victory was assured. For America, Operation Steel Response was more than retaliation. It was a declaration of boundaries, a statement written not in diplomacy, but in physics and fire. In Caracas, the government quietly replaced the national flag on naval buildings. The blue stripe, once symbolizing the sea, was darkened to almost black. Officially, it was called a modernization. Unofficially, it was mourning disguised as patriotism. In Washington, generals moved on to the next briefing, the next contingency plan, the next potential flashpoint. But somewhere in the Pentagon archives, behind layers of encryption, the full footage of the November 2nd engagement played on an endless loop, not as celebration, but as warning. Every frame a reminder that modern warfare was no longer fought with armies or front lines. It was fought in seconds, between radar signals, between algorithms, between restraint and annihilation. And in those seconds, nations either survived or vanished. The USS Knights would return to service 6 months later, its repaired hull gleaming under the Florida sun. It carried a new insignia now, a silver phoenix rising from the waves. Beneath it, a single phrase was engraved: fire met discipline. The Caribbean never forgot, and neither did the world.